Welcome to D&D Builds. My name's RJ, and D&D 1 just released some new playtest material right after there was another interview with Jeremy Crawford, and we got to talk about all of it because there's tons of great and interesting and some not so great updates. We've got updates to rules, to classes, to feats, to spells, and all sorts of stuff in between. So we got a lot to get through. And there's one noticeable change that I'm starting to see, especially with this playtest material, that I am really not a fan of, but I'll talk about that at the end. First, let's cover some of the new rules updates. One update they made was about exhaustion. Now it's more of an exhausted level. If your character gets exhausted, it gets 1 point of being exhausted, and it goes all the way up to 10. It just adds a -1 modifier to any d20 roll or your DC spell checks to any spells that you cast. But if you get all the way to level 10 of exhausted, you die. There's another cool update to a rule called influence. So now you can try and influence characters in particular ways. And I know people kind of already did this, but I see this as a more solidified way of being able to affect other characters and especially non-player characters. And even more notably, you might be able to use this feature for something like a taunt mechanic if you wanted to be more of a tanky type of character in D&D. There's a slight tweak to offhand weapons and now referring to them specifically as light weapons and how they work. But frankly, the wording is just kind of weird and it makes it a little more confusing as to what's okay and what's not when using an offhanded weapon or dual wielding. Another small update is that short swords are now qualified as simple weapons, which I really like because frankly, I always thought of them that way and I always got confused anytime I had to really remember that they're martial weapons. They also added some other new actions, like you can take the study action, which was kind of interesting, and they made it so if you plan to jump more than 5 feet, it now takes an action to jump that far, which some people might be kind of pissed about, but frankly I don't see this as a major loss. And then there was plenty of updates to a couple spells, but some of the more notable changes were to Bark Skin, which now allows you to upcast Bark Skin to cast it on more people. Doesn't increase your AC any more than the normal Bark Skin already did, and the Guidance cantrip. There's a fairly major change to this one because now instead of taking an action, it takes a reaction. And this is a huge benefit for most clerics or anybody with a divine spell list now, because I've been in plenty of parties where people are just spam casting Guidance hoping that it comes into effect. Now it's more of a reaction and it's a little less annoying that way. There's one other big change to spell casting, and that's that everybody can now cast spells as rituals. This was a feature that was kind of forgotten about a lot of times in 5th edition, so I can see why they just kind of threw it away and said, you know what, everybody can do it. And speaking of those spells and spell lists, I mentioned in my previous D&D 1 review video that spell lists are going to be split into arcane, divine, and primal spell lists. Some people were starting to think that that was simply for the magic initiate feat, but this is continuing on through. So now those 3 spell lists are all you get. You get arcane for the more magic-y folk, primal for the more nature-y folk, and you get that divine for the more religious folks. And these classifications are starting to bleed into other areas of D&D 1. Now they've actually classified the genre of every class that exists in D&D. Now they have the experts, which are going to be the rogues, the bards, and the rangers. They have the mages, which are the purely arcane spellcasters like the warlocks, the sorcerers, or the wizards. You have the priests, which frankly I don't really like the name of that as a classification. I feel like they could have come up with something better like the holy or something. But this lumps in the paladins, the clerics, and it also throws in the druids, which kind of makes sense because usually they tend to be a bit more healers, but it's kind of a toss-up whether you'd want to make them that or mages. So I'll totally accept it, and they're usually more of worshipping nature itself, so you can see it as more of that worship type of class. And then finally there's the warrior genre of classes, and this is the purely martial classes like fighters, barbarians, and monks. And now let's really dive into what some of these updates to classes are, because they're all getting some tweaks. All of the classes get a bit of an update, but the major one is that anything that you would have gotten at 20th level, now you get at 18th level, and now at 20th level you get an epic boon, which is essentially a feat, but those epic boons can actually be very specific to the type of class that you are. So whether you're an expert or a warrior or a mage, each one of them has their own types of boons they have available. I was initially super worried about this because the idea that you can grab your 20th level feature at 18th level now means that the whole concept where you're supposed to be able to use D&D 1 and play seamlessly with anything from 5th edition, seemed kind of like that was just going against that idea altogether. But then I started looking into it a little more, and it just kind of started to work and make sense. Most 20th level features aren't all that game breaking for the most part. They usually just give you some additional resources, and there are some other exceptions to that, but it does show a bit easier in the 3 classes that are shown in this playtest material, because they really did a deep dive on those expert classes: the Bard, the Ranger, and the Rogue. So let's talk about those classes, starting with the Bard. And we'll focus mostly on the big changes, because I don't want to go ahead and completely relist everything about these classes. The major changes, right off the bat, are that Bards now get specific access to simple weapons and nothing beyond that, at least at the base level. They can use Bardic Inspiration as a reaction now, which is kind of helpful and also follows the same idea as how Guidance is working. They can now use that Bardic Inspiration as many times as their proficiency bonus instead of anything to do with their charisma modifier, which they've kind of been leaning that way anyways. And now that Bardic Inspiration can be used to automatically heal somebody. Another big change they're making in pretty much all of the classes is a suggested spell list. I really like this change because it can be overwhelming to new players as to what spells to choose, and you don't have to stick with them, but it's nice to have some sort of starting idea to go with. Another notable change is that bards can swap their spells at any long rest, which is kind of just what clerics used to be able to do most of the time, but now they can just grab whatever they want, whenever they want. Lastly, there are some default spells that you just get automatically and you don't have to worry about preparing them, and those are some Songs of Restoration. They're specifically healing songs or healing spells that you can cast. So now you can focus a bit more on what other spellcasting or other spells you want to pick. And speaking of those spells you want to pick, you are a little more limited now. Because since you have access to the entire arcane spell list, they had to figure out a way to limit you otherwise. So now you don't have access to the Evocation School of Spells or the Necromancy School of Spells in any way, at least as baseline. So now when you choose spells, they have to be of illusion, divination, transmutation, or enchantment, of course, because you're a bard. If you didn't have enchantment, it would be a bit of an issue. Otherwise, most of the other features of being a bard are fairly the same when it comes to the baseline bard. But they also included one subclass for every class on this playtest material. And the subclass they included for bard is lore. One of the biggest changes to the lore bard is that there's no more additional magical secrets. The baseline bard still gets magical secrets. They can still grab it from any spell list, and it can be of any school, not limited like it is for the rest of their spells. And one of the biggest benefits of being a lore bard traditionally was being able to get more magical secrets or more spells from another spell list. But they did have to make this change, especially since you have access to most of the arcane spell list already. They replaced it with 2 features, because now you get features at slightly different levels than you did in 5th edition. They give you Cunning Inspiration, which makes it so you can roll 2 inspiration dice and just take the better one, but that's kind of a crappy ability compared to magical secrets. And you get Improved Cutting Words, allowing you to deal some psychic damage at the same time as you use your Cutting Words ability that's already included in the lore bard of 5th edition. And finally, they made Peerless Skill a lot less risky to use. So now if you use your Peerless Skill, but you still fail an ability check using your inspiration die with Peerless Skill, you don't lose that inspiration dice. So it's a little less risky, but I'll go into that a little later. The next big change is to Rangers. And frankly, I'm very biased towards Rangers. It was one of my first characters I ever played, so I'm going to be a little extra critical here, but I'm not surprised that they made some updates. It was a little underpowered originally, and they've tried to boost him up over and over again. So here's how they did it now. First things first, all Rangers get cantrips. You get to choose a couple cantrips right from the start, and you get more cantrips as you go on. And I do like this. It's just a minor boost, and it's definitely not really game breaking. It just gives you a little more versatility. Also, a big change here, since Rangers are considered an expert, they get expertise right away. They get expertise in 2 skills right at 1st level and then again at 9th level. And that puts them a bit more on par with the rogues, and it definitely boosts them into a similar level for the most part. And it does drive home that idea of them being the expert classes. And then they get some tweaks to their spellcasting, because obviously they get to choose from the primal spell list, just like the druids, and they no longer have to worry about learning Hunter's Mark. Because now, instead of favored enemy having some vague benefits here and there, it just gives you Hunter's Mark. But it's not an issue because now Hunter's Mark gets a boost, but just for rangers. Favored enemy is now about focusing on one enemy that you just really want to attack. And now Hunter's Mark for rangers doesn't require concentration. Otherwise, it functions exactly the same, but not having to have concentration on it is such a massive benefit. I've been waiting for something like this for a long time, and it really helps the ranger a lot. So thank you so much, this playtest material. And similarly to altering that, there's no more Natural Explorer perk. They split that up into 2 other perks a bit more. Now at level 7, you get Roving, so you gain a climbing and swimming speed, and your overall speed is increased by 10 feet. Additionally, at level 11, you get Tireless. So now your exhaustion level, which we covered in the rules update before, can now be reduced on a short rest, when usually it can only be reduced by 1 on a long rest. So this is going to be great for people that want to multi-class a ranger with a barbarian, because now you can go with a berserker barbarian. You don't have to deal with exhaustion in nearly as bad of a way as you did before. You can reduce those exhaustions on a short rest, and since barbarians can't concentrate on a spell, with Hunter's Mark, you don't have to worry about concentration anymore anyways as a ranger. And lastly, the baseline ranger gets a benefit from Foe Slayer, which now doesn't boost based on your wisdom. It just increases the amount of damage from your Hunter's Mark, upgrading from a 1d6 to a 1d10. And that Foe Slayer doesn't happen at 20th level anymore. It happens at 18th level, like I mentioned before. And they did include one subclass for the ranger, and it's the Hunter, which is a very baseline ranger to choose. But they made some major changes to the Hunter, and Hunter was my very first type of ranger I ever played too. So I'm a little more critical of this because I liked the versatility of Hunter. At every feature level, you got to choose some specific abilities to tweak and focus your playstyle. But this kind of streamlines that a bit, and that makes it so it's a little easier for new players. But if you wanted that more versatility and ability to tweak, you don't really have that anymore. I don't really like that because they already did that with the Monster Slayer subclass, so I don't know why they would remove that versatility now, but whatever. They went with some of the more baseline abilities that most people choose most of the time anyways, and they boosted some of them up a little bit. Now they essentially gave you Colossus Slayer automatically as the 3rd level benefit, allowing you to add a 1d8 to damage that you deal once per turn. Instead of your baseline defensive tactics, now you have Hunter's Lore, allowing you to just understand your enemies a little better. So now you get ideas of their strengths, weaknesses, and resistances, or even vulnerabilities, which can be pretty helpful. Now the multi-attack feature from being a hunter is a little more streamlined as well. It just gives you the spell Conjure Barrage, and then it gives something unique. You can actually downcast Conjure Barrage, which you could never really do with most spells before. And doing so does decrease the damage, but it does have some give and take there, so I'm okay with it. And lastly, Superior Hunter's Defense does make a pretty major change, and that's that it pretty much forces you to take Uncanny Dodge, but it also mixes it with an ability from the Drunken Master Monk where you can deflect damage to a nearby enemy. And that was kind of a surprise to me. Then the last class we got some updates for is the Rogue. The biggest changes here, which I'm sure some people were expecting to just have bonus actions give the ability to grant you advantage, like they kind of added in as an optional feature. But instead, at 13th level, they made it so that way you always have advantage on attacks as long as your enemy has an enemy of them that is an ally of you within 5 feet of them. The other big changes is that Slippery Mind doesn't just give you proficiency in wisdom saving throws anymore, it also gives you proficiency in charisma saving throws. And finally, Stroke of Luck grants you a 20 on the dice on any d20 roll. And then the subclass they decided to focus on is the Thief subclass. There's no major changes early on, but a big one that is going to be a huge help is how they handle dealing with magical devices. They can now attune to 4 items instead of 3 like most people, at least other than artificers. And when you expend charges of a magical item, you can roll a d6, and if you get a 6 on that dice, you don't expend any charges, which is kind of cool. And I would say it's overpowered, but a 1 in 6 chance of making it happen makes it a little more level. And the final other thing that could be a little bit game breaking if done properly, at least if I'm reading it right, is how thieves can use magic scrolls. It seems like you can actually use 2 scrolls for the price of 1. But you have to pass an Arcana check to do so. And if you fail, you lose the scroll altogether. But if you pair up a rogue with a scribe's wizard, I can see this as being insanely useful for a lot of rogues. But I feel like people might exploit it, so it's something to look out for. And finally, they have Thief's Reflexes, which allows you to take 2 bonus actions, as long as one of those bonus actions is for a cunning action, which can be pretty helpful, especially for people that like to dual wield. Now let's move on to the updates to some of the feats. There's a ton of feats listed here, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of the major changes that all the feats listed right over here are actually required that you're 4th level to pick up, which is definitely going to change how some people build their characters. And there's even a little additional clarification on something like the crossbow expert, especially when it comes to attacking with an offhand, which I know was a bit of a debate on my Discord channel a while back. But some of the big differences in some of the feats: Durable gives you advantage on death saves, Elemental Adept gives you a bonus to one of your ability scores, Grappler has some tweaks to it to make grappling a bit more effective. Heavy Armor Master is now much more useful because before it had a very limited use and it was only helpful really early on in levels, but now it blocks a certain amount of damage equal to your proficiency bonus, so it can really continue to improve as you level up. Polearm Master now gets +1 to strength, Observant gives you expertise in a skill, and you can search as a bonus action. Ritualist has the benefits you had before, but now you can also cast rituals at its normal casting time while still casting them as rituals. Skulker gets a bit of a boost, adding blind sight and adding some sniper abilities, not to mention some advantage on stealth checks to hide during combat, so that would be very helpful for some rogues. And then they added a speedster feat, so you get +10 to your speed, and you get to ignore difficult terrain when you're dashing. But the big changes are from Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master. Great Weapon Master now gives you +1 to strength, which is a pretty nice little bonus, but now you don't actually have to sacrifice any accuracy on your hit. Used to be that you took a -5 to your attack roll and give you +10 to your damage, which was a kind of cool trade-off, and a lot of people really like this. But now you don't sacrifice anything on your accuracy, but the amount of damage you increase by is equal to your proficiency bonus. So it's far less additional damage. So this might kind of have some issues with some Great Weapon Master builds, but it does level the playing field a bit more. And Sharpshooter gets massively nerfed. There is no more bonus damage for Sharpshooter. It still adds the ability to shoot at long range and ignore some cover, but now instead of bonus damage, you get the ability to fire at close range without disadvantage, which I feel like isn't that good of a trade-off. Those were all level 4 feats. There also is some tweaks to some level 1 feats, which is kind of crucial because in this playtest material, you can essentially get a feat right at level 1, so these are going to be much more important when it comes to starting off your character. They still have the Fighter Initiate Fighting Styles feat, but there are some tweaks to those fighting styles, which I'm sure we're going to see in the fighter class when it comes out in the playtest material. They had to change the wording on 2-weapon fighting, which is only more complicated based off of how it's worded with the new light weapons rule thing. And now the protection feat, instead of imposing disadvantage on an enemy to protect your ally with your shield, now it just gives a flat -2, which feels like a bit of a downgrade. Now, I don't know how I feel about that one. Then they tweaked Inspiring Leader to be a bit more like it was before the last playtest material, because they're kind of messing with the inspiration ideal that they were playing with even more in the last playtest material. And then another big change that you can get at level 1 is Lightly Armored as a feat. Now it grants access to light armor and medium armor and shields. So I can picture a lot of spellcasters trying to grab this right away, because now the wizard can have some medium armor and a shield and cast shield, so they can have 24 AC without any issues. And I don't know how I feel about that one. Then as far as feats go, we got to talk about the epic boons. I was expecting some insane stuff, but frankly it's somewhat underwhelming, and I can see why they did it. It adds some very straightforward features, like maybe the ability to cast some more spells, giving you advantage on certain things, ignoring resistance to other things, or giving you resistance, or making you more durable, or giving you more health, or the ability to recover more health. Most of them are fairly straightforward, and they do have requirements based on the type of class that you are, whether it's the mage or expert or any of those things we covered before. So when I was initially worried about things being thrown completely out of whack by taking a 20th level feature and putting it at 18th level and then getting an epic boon at 20th level, it's not quite as game breaking as I initially thought, but it does still throw things a bit out of level because you're just kind of granted this automatically. So it doesn't mesh as well with 5th edition, but we'll see how it all plays out. My biggest issue and my big red flag with this new playtest material is how they're handling rolling a natural 1. I feel like D&D is starting to try and make the route that World of Warcraft did, where they tried to make it more accessible or more easy for new players. And I can see that for character building, but you need to let people fail. Allowing people to fail in certain ways makes succeeding much more rewarding when it actually happens. And they're kind of trying to make it so players just can't fail. I mean, I get trying to make the hunter a bit more simplified for newer players. I even understand taking the lore bard's peerless skill and making it a little less risky to use. But the big change they made is now when you roll a nat 1, you get inspiration. So now if you completely fail at something, you're also winning. This feels like getting a participation trophy or something. I mean, people need to be able to fail so that way they can succeed and it feels like it's rewarding. Allow people to critically fail. Frankly, some of the most enjoyable moments I've had in D&D are when somebody critically fails at something and everyone's like, oh no, oh my God, that sucks. And then everybody kind of unites in that failure and it's so much fun. But now you're like, oh, well, at least I get inspiration and I can roll an extra dice next time. It's like, no, that just kind of detracts from the overall experience. I really don't like this rule change. I'm hoping it doesn't stick around. I feel like they're really kind of throwing something at the wall and just seeing if it sticks, and I'm hoping that's the case. Especially since the last feature that everybody absolutely hated, which was that only weapon damage could crit and you couldn't do it if you were the DM. Nobody liked that. They immediately got rid of it and they're like, well, we're still getting some feedback according to Jeremy Crawford. But I think it was pretty universal. It's just like, no, nobody really likes this. It kind of sucks. Just please, just don't include this going forward. And I'm pretty sure they heard that immense amount of backlash and listened. So hopefully they maybe do that again this time. That is the general overview of the One D&D new playtest material that was just released, and I'm looking forward to seeing how some of the other classes get updated, especially the spellcasters and especially the barbarian, because now how exhaustion works, it makes the berserker a little more usable. If you've checked out the One D&D playtest material, let me know in the comments down below whether you think it's really cool or what you love about it, what you hate about it, or what you think of my opinions. I'm here to listen to all of it. If you want to help support this channel with all of its D&D content, and especially my Dungeons & Dragons character builds, which I make tons of ridiculous ones, feel free to check out my Patreon, linked in the description down below. Like these incredible people and these incredible people, they get access to all those character sheets and plenty of other perks, and especially my player character level patrons, Theo Pollard and Biscuit Gaming. And going above and beyond that, my Dungeon Master level patrons, Devin Happy, Tristan Bennett, Benjamin, and GameSteak. They get additional perks, including having D&D sessions hosted by me that I stream right here on YouTube as well as over on Twitch. And then finally, my patron among patrons, my God tier level patron, Kilo. I can't thank this guy enough. He really just absolutely boosts up this channel and he's just absolutely incredible for it. So thank you. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let me know by hitting that like button, and I'll be here hoping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session, especially if you're going to be one of the people trying out this playtest material, because there's a lot to get through and hopefully there's a lot more updates to come. So thank you for watching.